just make sure you're all on, we're all on the same page.
Yep.
So when the councils were merged, I think on the 12th of May, right, it's an odd year. It's not balance date, which is the 30th of June. So the new council then is in place, it's Central Coast Council. But the accounts for the previous year for both councils has to still be done.
Yep.
So they were done then, even though the chief executives from those areas had gone because Rob Noble was the new one. So if you like, the new merged council was actually looking back and doing two separate accounts for the previous councils for their previous year. So from July 1, 2015 through to the 12th of May 2016, they did a year. And then the first year of the new council went from the 16th of whatever it was, 12th of May, 16th, I can't remember the exact date, through till the following.
So you're saying that under administration, before the September 2017 election, an informal change was made to accounting.
Correct.
To turn unrestricted water and sewer funds into... to turn restricted water and sewer funds into unrestricted
so
water.
right up until that voluntary change was put in place, okay, the previous councils both reported it as per the Local Government Act 1993, correctly. Then it was changed right at that point in time when those two councils, and there was one audit firm involved who did both councils, somewhere in there it was changed. And then the new council just continued that on because the voluntary accounting policy was then in place.
Now, at the time when the auditor refused to sign off on those accounts, I sent 30 questions to Mr Noble, and he sent me a one-paragraph response. I was at the papers at that stage, and he said, much too busy to answer your questions, let's just draw a line under this and move on. So when you say you'd spoken to the CEO, was that the CEO you'd spoken to?
Yes, I spoke to
him.
Rob.
And he said he was not aware of this change.
He was totally unaware. As I said, nobody was aware.
So, but someone
just
must
happened.
have been, because it can't have just
Correct.
happened.
You're quite correct. Someone had to have been aware, and we can't determine who that was because there's no CFO. All those senior financial people are no longer with the organisation.
So Ian Reynolds,
the administrator?
Ian Reynolds would have signed off as well, but he was unaware. According to Rob Noble, he was unaware. Senior management was not aware.
So they were unaware of what they signed off on?
That's correct, and this is one of the arguments of the Auditor General, is simply that the council, they said argued for it. I've made the case we didn't argue for it, but they did sign off.
So,
but you see, it occurred in that sort of grey period when they were switching over years. So Rob's comments that he was flat out at that time, I can certainly understand he was flat out, and nobody picked it up. The Auditor General didn't pick it up for the ongoing years. The ARIC committee, which is which is made up of externals, they didn't pick it up.
But now, just to clarify, the other key point that you made is that you and Natalia have treated it as a previous era mistake.
A prior period.
And so you're now accounting for those funds as restricted funds.
Yes.
Right.
Yep. And that's what we've corrected.
Right.
So when you do that, so if I can go back just to those early days when I said there was $88 million of money, if we go back to the day, the time of merger, that meant that the two councils combined only had $4.6 million of working capital or unrestricted cash.
Which wasn't enough.
Which is nowhere near enough to run an entity of $750 million turnover.
But because of this change, they thought they had 93 million of unrestricted.
You could have thought that, yes, but I don't think anybody thought about using it, because that's why I raised the point that I asked the Auditor General's office, could I actually spend the money? And they said yes. But the Office of Local Government said no, because they believed that we were still under the Local Government Act. And as you've heard, our legal opinion from Clayton Utes, and it's a senior partner in tier 1 law firm, it was unequivocal, despite having seen the Crown Solicitor's advice.
So didn't understand, did Clayton Utes say yes, you could spend it?
No.
They said no, you
No, they agreed 100% with us, the prior period era.
Okay, but the Auditor General's recommendation was that you could, but it wasn't.
No, they didn't recommend. They didn't recommend anything.
Well, they said.
No, they just said, when I said to them, so that means I could spend the money because it's classified as unrestricted cash. They responded, yes, you could.
So why don't you take their why don't you use it that way? Because then would we have to pay it back?
I can't ignore legal advice, as you just heard, and said that. I'd be derelict in my duty if I did that.
Okay.
Looking at this, what have we learned from all this?
Good question. What we've learned from this is that I think councils have become quite blasé about how they manage their restricted and unrestricted cash, and most councils just run it as one big lump sum in the bank account, which then via the investment report, which councils have to put up monthly, say where it's all invested. But what people see in there, they see the total amount of money and total amount invested. What they don't see is the little bit, which is only about 3 lines in it, which lists how that money's made up, such as internally restricted, externally restricted and unrestricted. And once you run out of unrestricted cash, then you are broke, because it's a bit like a law firm with a trust account. So as you know, monies go into a trust account, which is not the lawyers' money. So when they're operating their business, paying their rent or their mortgages and their salaries and everything else, they can only take it out of their fee side. They can't go into the trust account and use that money. And you've seen both accountants and lawyers go to jail because they've actually accessed the trust fund. Similar situation to us, and we have the reserves, the externally restricted reserves, which are protected by the Local Government Act, and we must acquit those in the way that they're allowed to be acquitted. So what I think we've learned out of this is that we need to be a bit more careful on this. In my opinion, as I said at the end there, that local government, the Office of Local Government has withdrawn the requirement for councils to report their unrestricted cash, which to me is a nonsense.
Why is that?
You'd have to ask them, I don't know. Well, I do know in a sense. It's under the guise that it makes it more similar to corporate reporting, and they're trying to make government accounting a little bit more user-friendly for the average person in the street. But in my opinion, as I said, if you're going to keep restricted reserves and make that sacrosanct, then you have to, inverted commas, police it and keep that.
Your words, it beggars belief.
It does.
It beggars belief that this happened. No one knew about it. You came in and found out about it. So really, those 15 councillors, of those 15 councillors, only the ones who'd been around longer than that first council would have had any idea.
I think there's 2 different situations at play here. One was the use of restricted funds, the other was managing the budgets. And the councillors clearly knew what the budget was, and they were getting reports on that, and they were overspending.
But don't you think that overspending was partly due to the fact that they thought their cash position was healthier than it was?
Nobody saw that, nobody knew it. As I said, nobody took any notice. That's why it's an academic argument, because no one saw it. The figures were there, but the council has always operated on the fact that it's had the restricted reserves. But when it reported on an annual basis, for some reason, it used this voluntary accounting practice. But when it came down to a day-to-day use, we used the normal accounting practices as set by local government. So you might ask, why does that happen? But all I can say is I just don't know what the previous CFOs said. There was 4 CFOs over the period of time, and the senior staff that report to them, which is a level 4 in the organisation, they've disappeared as well. We don't have people left in the entity who knew what went on in detail back in those days. And I can't.
Will the council make a submission to the public inquiry about this and compel those people to give evidence?
It's in a sense, it's not material as to. Certainly, it's outside currently the terms of reference that local government, the state put forward. But as far as I'm concerned, it's not that relevant because the main issue was budget management. This is an academic thing talking about us, if you like, having a different viewpoint to the Auditor General over a qualification or one of the reasons for qualification. There's only 2 reasons there, which I listed both. The first one we basically are accepting. We should have done that better, and that we're addressing that, and that's a relatively easy thing to address.
But it is important in terms of the fact that you've had to borrow an additional $100 million, and that has led to all sorts of measures to satisfy your commercial lenders.
But that's because we ran out of cash.
So, did the council
Could the Minister of Local Government not make this cash unrestricted with just a signature?
You'd have to ask them that question. I don't believe they can. As I said, and I've said many times, there was no bailout by the state government. So whether they gave us let's say, a cash grant of $100 million to bail us out, which was what a shareholder might have decided to do or a stakeholder might have decided to do. They didn't choose that option. They asked us to go through the commercial restructuring process as per a corporate receivership in any company. So that's what we had to go through, and that's why we ended up taking loans where there was understandings and conditions about what we were going to have to do.
You can understand the people now fighting to preserve their reserves, green spaces and community assets, and now they've been served this blow that this happened at amalgamation and no one is there that can even answer to them. Don't you think that they would look at it now and saying, look, someone needs to be responsible for this, because if we would have had a better understanding of our financial position, everything would have been probably done differently. Don't you think? I mean, if Natalia would be
not really. Look, if you have to come back to the fundamental problem was budget management. Once you lost $40 million of revenue from that IPART decision, that was the killer blow. But prior to that, you cannot go up for 3 years losing money. You cannot go spending money which you don't have on new capital works of $70+ million. Those are the things you can't do. And it's like any of us in our home life. You know, I might want to live a better and greater lifestyle, but unless I've got income to support it.
But didn't the accounts for 2018-2019, which were published, make the financial situation look healthy?
The first year straight after merger, yes, things looked relatively healthy. But bear in mind, we had to book the income from the state of all that money, the grants that they gave, which was in excess of $40 million. So $40 million came from the state, and that's one of these examples I talk about. It makes it, it throws it out of kilter with these vast sums of money that are coming in from both the state and the Commonwealth, because councils, generally speaking, because they're short of money all the time, grab it with great alacrity and say, this is fabulous, let's get on and spend it. They kind of forget that you've actually got to look after that asset, depreciate it, look after its repairs and maintenance, and so on. And when you add all that in and your rates are limited about what you can catch, then you run into this situation, well, what do we do? And you'll find that most councils, when they go for a rate increase, what they're arguing is that they've got a backlog of their infrastructure, because that's what they do. They don't look after their assets well enough and they run down. And then they go to IPART to say, we need a rate increase so we can spend more money and reduce our asset backlog. So that's the standard process and cycle that councils go through on a regular basis.
So you think it's a political decision that they wouldn't give you money from T Corp and made you go public?
They made it clear that T Corp is not a bank.
But it is, isn't it?
No, T Corp is a body that sources funds and basically lends them out to the state predominantly for infrastructure.
Which gives you a better interest rate?
T Corp probably would get a better rate because that they utilise the state's credit rating, which is probably better than ours, or any council's credit rating. Yes, you could do that. In Queensland Treasury, QT, that's how they do it. So in Queensland, the jurisdiction, the only place a council can borrow from is is from Queensland Treasury. And yes, they do get the benefit of much cheaper rates by doing that, but that's not the principle applied in New South Wales. T Corp is seen as a provider of funds to build motorways and tunnels and all those sorts of things, and also it gets, I guess, supplies funds for government to provide a lot of grants to local government.
Given what we've learned then about the accounting then in those years prior to 2017, what are the ramifications for other councils? Like, is that going to perhaps, are we like a canary in the coal mine that maybe others have gone through that, but maybe not to the magnitude? Yep.
I actually think you're 100% right. I have to ask myself, when you look at the liquidity ratios of what councils do, they struggle to meet that 1.5 factor. And I think what happens in a lot of cases, if you take the beginning of a year, financial year, we put the rates notice goes out and people have got through till the end of the first quarter to pay. So those first 3 months of the year, we're generally pretty short on money coming in. So you have to ask yourself the question, where does the council find its money to keep on spending on its operating side for those first few months? My suspicion is that you'll find a lot of councils just temporarily dip into their restricted or internally restricted reserves, and then the money starts flowing in from the rates and so on, and they can repay it all back. So I think a lot of councils are operating on that very, very skinny way. So that's what I say. I think government has got to make up its mind whether it's going to have this system, and if it is, then it's got to police it and make councils actually properly account for their monies, properly acquit their monies, as we do for a state or a federal loan, grant. We have to acquit it and prove that we've done the work, etc., etc. And I think the state needs to check on whether people have got the right amount of monies and balances in their restricted and non-restricted cash reserves, and that audit needs to check on that.
So is it accurate to say, sorry if I'm behind,
No, not at all.
that the $200 million that we have to pay back in restricted funds is directly attributable to that voluntary policy?
No, not at all. As I said,
3 million, is that?
no, you see, what?
No. I thought I was right.
No, it's not directly attributable to. As I said, it's an academic exercise because the council has always been correctly following the right procedures. But it reports, and you've just got to think it's a balance sheet is just, and an annual statement is just a moment in time where you say this is what it is. That's all it is, just a moment in time. So after that, things change around dramatically and go back and forth, up and down, and then at the end of the next year, you count another moment in time. What you do have is that from a cash perspective, if you're losing money through there, so if your income is less than what you've spent during the year, that's a loss. So how do you fund that loss? Because someone has to pay for it, and you draw that money from somewhere. Now, that's normally where you would draw it from your unrestricted cash reserve, like your savings account, if I was to use that sort of expression. So that's where you draw your funds from. Then at some point in time, as you make a bit of excess money, you tip it back into your savings account so that it's there for the next rainy day. That's what the councils have not been keeping a track of. So when they've had COVID, when they've had storms and floods and fires and all of that, they weren't keeping track of exactly what they were spending. So when councillors were deciding they wanted to be very generous and waive fees and charges for people, they're giving away their income when their costs are going up. So it doesn't take a whiz kid to figure out that you can't keep doing that forever. And that's the sort of thing that was happening. And as I said, my view is that when councillors see an investment report that says there's $400+ million sitting in a bank account, they think there's a lot of money there, not really understanding what's restricted and they can't access, like a trust fund or your superannuation, versus that they can use.
So you showed that that bottom line was missing, that because there was no unrestricted funds, there was no line there, you showed the councillors.
Yep.
Is that a mistake, or should that have come to the council every meeting with that line there, or was it normal not to have it there because there were no funds?
Well, what I would have expected, I can't say exactly what happened, I wasn't present at any of those council meetings, but in any organisation, the alarm bells would have been ringing really big time for someone like myself. As a CEO, I would have said, absolutely, there's a problem here if I'm running out of cash. Having been in the private sector for half my life, I'm pretty familiar with, cash is king. So I know when cash is running out, then I've got a problem. So if I'd seen that there was no cash, I would have said, we've got to be doing something. What are we going to cut? And as I said, this was exacerbated when the IPART decision took away $40 million. It was great, and the council didn't react to that, and they kept spending at their same rate and kept putting on staff at the same rate as they had been previously doing. That's the thing that caused the problem, rather than amalgamation or anything like that. It was just simply that group of people in charge at that point in time didn't quite understand the impacts of what they were doing.
Just with the revaluation of bridges, roads and footpaths,
Yep.
is that going to make a material difference to your accounts in terms
It's
of depreciation? And
probably not, but you have raised a point that doing a reval, probably not so much for roads and footpaths and bridges, but certainly for other items like buildings and so on that are on operational land, yes, they definitely do, because as you increase your value, then you've got to actually provide a little bit extra in the depreciation line, because it's generally done on a basis.
And haven't you agreed to cap your depreciation as part of that?
No,
loan?
what we've agreed to cap is the capital expenditure.
Right.
So we've capped the capital expenditure at approximately $175 million per annum, which is approximately again what the council can actually handle. It promises to do sometimes a lot more, but it never actually gets it done because it doesn't have the capacity to either project manage or deliver those projects itself.
You mentioned the role of the ERIC committee, the Audit and Risk Committee. I mean, I've looked at a lot of their meeting minutes and also the attendance lists, and I find it very hard to believe that all these people for 4 years, I mean, I assume they were paid as well, right? Those people on these committees were paid.
Yep.
Have you sought conversations with Gallatley or some of the chair of that committee and have a response? Because I've reached out to him for...
No, we haven't had those. We haven't had those conversations, and there's a little bit. You know, I'm going to say something slightly different. I have some sympathy for auditors because they're only looking at what council staff produce and give to them. Okay, so if it's not clear, then you don't see it. It's not like they are checking every transaction or every journal entry or anything like that and looking at every explanation. They take samples and they check to see what happened in those samples. And if the samples look reasonably okay, then they'll say, on average, the rest of it's okay. So you've always got to remember that audit is not an exact thing. It is only looking at samples and making a decision based on, forecasting from those samples as to what the overall is.
But it's a committee, so it's not just an audit. It's
Yep.
an ongoing organic process of collaborative meeting where people give oral accounts. You know, a lot of the minutes are orally submitted, so it's hard to kind of check back. And they're still ongoing right now, right? The ERIC committee is continuing
Yes.
to meet monthly. So what are they? Obviously, it will be interesting briefing the next one, I guess. Will you bring? So what can
Probably
we
after my
expect?
comments, I definitely will be, I think, yes.
Yeah, so is there going to be a bit of a new culture in that committee?
Oh, I, without doubt, Central Coast Council is going to be scrutinised, certainly by its ERIC, certainly by the Office of Local Government, certainly by the bank, and certainly by IPART. And as I've said before, when you have to take an organisation that I had to do as the acting CEO, that's effectively in receivership and had been struggling to get refinance on a commercial basis, and then to drop off $70-odd million in costs, to have that out the door and complete so that we start the new financial year running with a positive surplus in the budget, to actually do that is a pretty big effort. And I guess at the end of the time, yeah, you've just got to say to yourself, well, we've got there, but we've got to keep it there. And as I said, when you get IPART making a decision for 3 years only, it puts us in a difficult position, as we now have to. It won't be so much me, it'll be the CFO and the CEO, but we're now negotiating with the banks about how we're going to future-proof our future revenue streams now that they could get cut off in 3 years' time and we don't get a renewal of that. In which case, then we have to be realistic and we'd face up to another round of cuts and sales and so on. So I'm hoping we won't go anywhere near that. I'm sure that we'll put up a good case and that we'll get the requisite 15% installed for the balance of time. But what it does do is it puts a lot of pressure on us fighting fires, if you like, when there's really no need. Because we are now going to have to go through discussions with current banking lenders to us. We have about $150 million of loans that are due to be refinanced within that 3-year period.
They're new loans?
No, they're existing loans which need to be refinanced. So when you refinance, which is a standard practice, you have to do this from time to time, when we do that, we'll be under the same pressure from those banks saying, well, how are you going to guarantee your future income in order to pay the principal and interest back? So we've got to do all that again. And as I said, there's no corporation in this that I'm aware of that has had to downsize by the size that we have had to, done that within 4 months, absolutely implemented it, and then turn around and get regulated by your income, by a regulator that I've got no control over. And I've got to report to another government organisation, being the Office of Local Government and the Department of Primary Industry and Infrastructure and Environment. I've got to report to them as well. And I've got to make a case with IPART. So you can see the cards are stacked up against us, and it does annoy me, I've got to say, when they force us through a commercial type receivership, and I've still got to do all these things which a normal company that can get itself out of receivership, all it's got to do is get refinanced and then it can get going again. We've got to manage all these other players as well as get the finance and get the organisation tracking along in a positive manner. So, obviously that's the task for Natalia and the CEO, David, to actually make sure we stick to that, and I'm 100% confident those two people will do that. There's no question about that. And the organisation is pretty attuned to it now. We have to manage to our cloth. And I still need, and I will touch on this, I still need people outside to understand, if they can, and I got into trouble for saying that previously, but to understand that this is a commercial receivership and we have to do these things. I don't have choices. I have to look at asset sales. I don't have a choice around it. I'm happy to look at any options around it, and when people are suggesting that it's easy to do, I should delay things and all the rest, then they're not sitting there with a banker looking over your shoulder, are you delivering it? And the ability for them just to take the money away. And what they don't actually take the money away. What they will do is they will capture our cash flow, which is the rates. So what they do is they put a charge, if you like, over our rate income. So they just divert the rates income to themselves. That's what they have the legal framework to be able to do. So you can see that's the world we live in.
I wonder how well that's going to go though
Sorry?
with the customers in the Central Coast.
So look,
It sort of makes me wonder why the state government didn't allow us to, the restricted funds were to state government departments.
we did request, the CFO and myself, we did request that the minister sign off on allowing us to borrow from the sewer reserve, which has a positive balance of something like 113 million in it.
Yeah.
So we asked that question, and it was refused. And look, I can understand the position, because otherwise, given what we've just talked about with internally and externally reserves, councils could just do that. They just go straight and borrow off their external reserves. So as I said, you have to either have them restricted or not. There can't be a halfway house. And that was, I think, the minister's concern, that if she allowed that, then the next council would come along, oh, can we borrow off this? And before long, you've got a complete mishmash of money being used from all sources.
Surely we were a sinking ship.
Hmm?
I mean, we were, diabolical situation, but it's probably an exception to the average.
Yes, you're asking, should we have been a separate, a special case? I guess we thought that by asking them, so we did go down that route, there's no question.
But you're now saying, you're asking the state government to make a decision on whether there are such things as restricted funds or unrestricted.
Yeah.
And so if the state government goes, okay, you can just have unrestricted funds, does that change it for us? Would that change it for us?
Yes, it would change it dramatically for us. But having said that, you've got to remember that, and I think I might have given these numbers previously, but when you look at our water and sewer numbers, and we compare that to, say, a Hunter, then if you take our value of assets, we're about $2.6 billion of water and sewer assets and dams, all of that. Hunter Water is about 2.8 billion, so which is, to all intents and purposes, the same. If you look at their depreciation, which they have to spend on looking after those assets and keeping them up to date, I think it's 63 respectively for us and 64 million for Hunter. But when you look at the revenue side, our revenue's 147 million, and Hunter Water, I think I'm right, Natalia, was about 360 something, is it?
Yeah, it was double, I think.
It was. I can't remember it off the top of my head. I'd need to clarify that one. But it's more. It was about double.
Now, is that because they pay more or because they've got more people?
They carry one of the things under their business model, and because they operate under that Water Management Act 2000, they carry an awful lot more debt. So if you look at the relative debt positions, their debt position, I think, was in the order of Hunter Water is about 1.3 billion, and for us it's in the order of a bank debt is around 350. So you can see, and that's for all the whole council business, not just water and sewer. So you can see there's a massive disparity there. So under the Water and Sewer Management Act and with IPART regulating it, IPART reward councils for spending more money on looking after things. So consequently, they borrowed a lot more at Hunter Water, as I said, 1.3 billion in debt, and their interest bill is something in the order of 60 plus million. And I think ours is in the order of 17 million for our bank debt. About 17 total, is it? Oh, somewhere, it's relatively small, and you'd think that's for the whole of council, not just our water business. So there's a different business model that operates there, and that's something we'll have to think about down the track as to how we actually approach that. And I am working with the CEO, Natalia, and Jamie Loader to actually work out how we might actually look at water into the future, because clearly it's, it's been an issue.
So just for my understanding, you said it was an academic,
Yep.
that the Auditor General had one view of it and you had another view.
Yep.
Why is it important?
Why is it important?
Yeah.
I just think it's important that the council has on the record why we made that decision to call it a prior period error. And it's important from the fact of view of staff inside the organisation, it's important for this, it's important for the community to actually know that this wasn't just a council sort of, in a sense, out of control, at that point in time. It wasn't. The council did do, I think, some mistakes back then, but the Auditor General relied on theirs of something that I call 5% in my commentary, of that Solicitor General's report, because if you've read it or had a look at it, just look at the executive summary, you'll see that it says everything about we're doing the right thing, doing what we're doing, but there was not without doubt, the words are forever etched in my mind, not without doubt you could have looked at it another way. You could have said, well, maybe that's the Crown making sure that both that the Auditor General had an excuse.
A way out.
A way out, yes.
Okay.
Is that about it, or anything else?
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
No?
Just another question for me, just to clarify, the 93 or the 88...
88 million, yep.
The 88 million, I think we've asked the question, but I didn't understand the answer. Is that, did that impact on that 200 million that we've spent that we shouldn't have spent? Is that part of that?
At the time, if you had taken that at its word, yes, it would have that impact. But as I said, the council went way beyond that amount of money, so it didn't exonerate the council at all. So if you work backwards to say, well, okay, if you considered it that way, we still end up in a similar problem, but not quite as big, but nonetheless still the same problem. So if you like, the last 3 years, which are the more important ones, with the councillors back, and this is when it really deteriorated by overgrowth in staff costs and over expenditure in capital works and making losses. And the effects of fire, flood, etc., etc.
One last question. I looked at, so Steve Nevin was the CFO at the time and Rob Noble was the CEO.
Yep.
They both were CEO and CFO of Wyong Council before the amalgamation. Yep. And this, there was a council meeting prior to the amalgamation that actually changed that accounting practice, correct? Is it not done at Wyong Council? No,
it was done, and this is the point. It applied to the previous year, but because the new council had been formed, it then had to look backwards. So it was the new CEO and the administrator at the time and whoever was appointed, and I can't remember who.
Because they did, there was a 2015 council meeting in Wyong that they got a sign-off by the Minister for Local Government at the time for sewage and water funds to 20 million.
That could well be the case, yeah.
So,
but that was all being accounted for under the old system. That's what we said. And it was only changed when the new council was formed, and it applied that voluntary policy to the two prior councils, and then from the new council onwards, at balance date.
But you said nobody understood that.
But nobody knew about it. As I said, it didn't come to, the whole thing didn't come to light till late last year.
Okay. Well, so did you speak to Steve Nevin at all?
Sorry?
Did you speak to the CFO, Steve Nevin, at all?
I haven't spoken. We don't know. I don't even know who it was.
Because
no,
he's CFO,
but I did speak to Rob Noble. Yes.
Rob Noble.
Yep. Yeah. As I said, I rang him obviously to be able to quote him. I needed to make sure and as he said, he had absolutely no understanding. No one had come to him talking about that, and he should have been. If someone in the organisation had agreed to do that, then it should have come to him anyway. And he said he never got anything. And that we can't find a single shred of evidence of anything that occurred at that time. As I said, it's unless you could get hold of the finance staff that were around the CFO and the couple of reports to him or her. I think it was a him, but it's unless you can get hold of them and verify from them, I don't know. Or you talk to the auditors, which were PwC.
But because of that, the unrestricted funds did show that 93 million.
At that time, yes.
Yeah.
But it wasn't real.
No, it was 5 million or less.
It was
than
4.66. Yep.
But at the time, everyone goes.
No one saw it. No one knew it. It didn't raise any alarm bells. Didn't raise anything at all. As I said, it was like there was a paper. There was some numbers on a piece of paper in an annual report you see once a year, and no one took any notice of it because thereafter it was accounted for properly. That's it. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Hopefully that was clear.